We happened to be on a trip to London and we went to the Tate Modern Museum, and they had an exhibit where it was a room with just a tower of TVs and radios, and every single one of them were on and playing at the same time. I was like, did you hear this right now? Can you understand what any of these things are saying at a given time? No, that's what the world sounds like to me. It sounds so loud and everyone's talking at the same time.
Hello and welcome to Divergent Paths. I'm your host, Dr. Regina McMenomy. I am a doctor, but not that kind of doctor. And this is a podcast, not medical advice. Have you always felt a little different but didn't know why? Have you struggled with tasks that some people seem to handle with ease? Are you mystified by social norms and interactions? Divergent Paths is a podcast for late diagnosed neurodivergent people to discuss their journeys discovering the joys and frustrations of having a spicy brain. Each episode, I will interview someone who discovered they have ADHD, autism, or a combination of the two later in life. What defines a later in life diagnosis? Anytime the realization happens outside of the quote-unquote norm of childhood and adolescence. Kaytalin Platt is a designer, artist, and author. Her debut novel, The Living God, was published in 2019. Along with her writing prowess, Kaytalin is a talented visual artist as well as a mom. She shares her story of discovering how her maladaptive daydreaming was related to her spicy brain and how it is a catalyst for much of her myth-making. So stay tuned, and thanks for listening to Divergent Paths. So our listeners already kind of know you, at least a little bit of you.
Fantastic.
Because you did the art for the podcast.
Yes, I did.
So
that was a very fun project.
I'm glad. I remember giving you very loose ideas and not really having like a really clear idea myself, and then being blown over by what you produced for me.
The benefit was, I think I went camping like the week before I worked on it, and that's always my reset for the year creatively. I just go into the woods for a week, and
nice.
I can't, like, there's no cell service up there. It's just really just get away from everything. So it helps me think clearer when I come back.
Yeah, I bet it does. Actually, I think one of the very few things that we know about neurodivergent brains is that time spent in nature is particularly important to get away from all the stimuli because of the dopamine drain that we have in just modern life in general. So
I grew up in Alabama on a farm up until I was like in my mid-20s, and then I moved to New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
So like I think a lot of the things that I didn't really notice, I was neurodivergent when I lived on the farm because I was in the middle of the nowhere and I didn't really have a lot of people to interact with who like to notice the differences. I just thought I was a weird kid. I just thought I was a weird kid.
Yeah, fair.
And I think also like I wasn't overstimulated because I was in like I didn't realize I had a problem with crowds or that I would get over like too much noise. Like I can't handle a lot of sounds.
Yeah.
And I didn't notice that because I lived in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, fascinating.
I lived in a town of 500 people.
Uh-huh.
And then I moved to New Jersey and I'm like, why is my brain breaking every time I like couldn't handle malls or crowds I'm better now. So much better.
Well, I mean, it's a lot of it is just exposure and, repeated exposures. But I lived in the Hudson Valley of New York. So I wasn't in Jersey, but I was close. And I used to fly out of New York all the time. And New Jersey has some of the biggest and most overstimulating malls that have ever existed.
I didn't know malls could be 2-story till I moved to New Jersey. I was like, what? There's a whole nother level to this?
You've got another story. This is 2 stories. Oh my God. Oh yes. Yeah. We used to go sometimes too. I can't remember the name of the mall that we went to, but it's and just the culture. I imagine that the culture shock from Alabama to New Jersey was just huge. in general.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And
But
people ask me if I had power and where I came from. Like one lady who I was getting something from CVS, and I'm like, I know that's not what you meant. You had to mean to ask me a different question.
right, yeah. That's what I was from, I moved to New York from California, and the question for me was always like, "Oh, what's it like to surf?" And I was
Mhm.
like, I the coast I grew up on is like very rocky, and like
Yeah.
people don't surf there because it's like the water is 50 degrees and it's 50 degrees
Mhm.
out most of the
Yeah,
time. And they're
yeah.
like, not all of California is LA. So
Mhm. That's
yeah, it's
true.
funny the impressions that people have.
Yes, yes. I think I probably would ask that same question of someone in California.
Hmm. Yeah. What's it like to surf? What's it like to have
Yeah,
sunny days all the time? And I'm like, I don't,
yeah.
no clue.
Perfect weather all the time, right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So sort of moving away from home and moving to a different state was part of what helped you realize your
Yeah. So,
neurodivergence.
well, I grew up in the middle of nowhere, like I said, and my school was kindergarten through 12th grade, 500 students. I had 30 people in my class.
Wow.
And I knew that I functioned different from most people.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what I did growing up was called maladaptive daydreaming, but
Uh-huh.
basically lived in my head.
Uh-huh.
And I, I just, I knew it was different. And I was the weird kid. My sister did not claim me as her sister. People,
You
people
come from
like it
different
was a
parents.
small town, and
Right.
people still didn't know that we were sisters until I graduated, and she came to my graduation. That's
Wow.
how on the low she wanted to be separated from me, I think.
Wow.
Um, but yeah, and I just thought I had no other explanation for other the fact that I like to live in my
Mm-hmm.
head, and I like
Right.
to read, and I
Right.
liked fantasy, and um yeah, and I didn't understand I might have ADHD until I met a person who also has it, and I was like noticing that we had very similar um hang-ups, I guess. I don't know what you would call them.
That's yeah. I mean,
And
that would have been how you thought about it at that time. You might think of it differently now, but
yeah,
yeah, sure.
yeah. And I was like, you know what? I think I might have that. And he goes, oh yes, totally. You totally do. He's like, please go find someone to diagnose you, which I have not officially done yet,
Okay.
unfortunately. I have a lot of autoimmune
Mhm.
issues, and
Those have
I'm
taken
all
precedence.
the time in the doctor for those things.
Mhm.
Because like I might have lupus and they don't know if I have lupus. I'm constantly getting my blood work done and doing all of these scans, and so it was just like I didn't want to go to my doctor with another thing
Mhm.
potentially wrong with me. So I have self-diagnosed at this point, which is probably not the best thing to do health wise, but I do plan on getting a formal diagnosis.
Yeah. It's a journey getting a formal
Mhm.
diagnosis, getting someplace that can give you the diagnosis, trying to get your insurance to cover a diagnosis,
Yeah. I
you
have
know?
a friend who recently got diagnosed, and she is actually considering going for an odd ADHD,
Mhm.
because she's noticing that a lot of her the things that she does overlap with
Mhm.
autism. So
Yeah.
like sound sensitivity and things like that.
Yeah, that's what, the assessment that I took was for both.
Mhm.
But I think I outsmarted most of the autism
Yeah.
test. I didn't come back. There were 4 tests that they could give, and of 3 of them
Mhm.
I had been negative, and so or negative, not showing indications of
Yeah.
autism. And then I opted at that point not to take the long 2-hour,
Mhm.
200 question assessment because I
Oh,
was
I
like,
wouldn't. Yeah.
I just want to stop now. At that point, I had been in testing for 5 hours,
Oh,
for
wow, no, I
4
couldn't.
hours. Yeah, and it was gonna be another 2 hours, and I'm like, "We can just be done right now."
Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
when I got my feedback, he's like, "The more I talk to you, the more autistic you seem." So, I was like, "Well, that's an interesting observation." And now that my ADHD is medicated, my
Mhm.
autism's like, "Hi." How you been?
Yeah, yeah, that's what I think, 'cause she started medication for ADHD and is like, "Oh, I'm
Oh,
functioning better now, and now
yes.
I'm starting to notice these things."
Yes. Yes, I think it's a very common experience,
Yeah.
especially I think for female identified or assigned female birth bodies because
Mhm,
our presentation tends to be so different from what was
mhm.
originally studied and considered for
Yeah.
ADHD.
Mhm,
So I think a lot of times, especially, or maybe especially for autism, I think, because I just saw a TikTok that was like, oh, back in the 90s, they didn't think girls could have autism. And it's like, yeah, that's because they only study boys. I mean,
yeah. That's
imagine.
unfortunate.
Yeah.
But, yeah, and that's why so many women, I think, are getting their diagnosis, like, much later
Hmm.
in life,
Hmm.
and, um like social media has a tendency to make things seem like a trend, but no, it's just people are becoming more informed and they're like, hey, I think I have this, and then they're finding out that they actually do.
Yeah, exactly. I know I know there have been some things like I've seen a few posts of people on, some of my social media that go along the lines of, what, does everybody have ADHD now? And it's like, well, we tend to find each other.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Like, our hey, your brain functions like my brain, can we be friends, because they
Right.
they don't get
They
me.
don't get this, right?
Yeah,
And you're not as likely to
yeah,
seek out connections with people who don't have that kind of functioning.
yeah.
So like for that too, I think that that well, everybody does that. Well,
Mhm.
no.
Yeah, that was like, I was like, I thought everybody did the maladaptive dreaming. I thought people daydreamed like I did. Like, I like
Right.
just tune out, like the whole world just disappears and I'm inside a movie in my head.
Mhm.
And I thought that was how people daydreamed, and apparently they don't. um
And so when did you kind of realize that that was different?
Very recently, I read up on it, and I was just like, "Oh, that's what I've been doing all my life." I thought
Mm,
everyone tuned out the entire world to the point of not hearing,
right.
not seeing, and just seeing what's going on in my head. And yeah, and I was like, "Oh, well, that's, I guess, how I write books," because I just
That's exactly where I was gonna go. So you're an author and, you don't just do graphic design, you do art
Mhm.
and do write as well. And so is that where like are your novels and your stories that inner daydreaming on the page?
Yeah, that's what I like, the series that I'm closing out started, I basically wrote it in my head while I
Mhm.
should have been doing algebra. Um,
I don't know.
and then in college, I was like, "Well, what happens if I write it down on paper?" So I just started transcribing my daydreams, basically.
Nice.
And now I'm 4, almo 4 books in. The 4th book comes out next year. I have another book that came out in August, a different series, and it's just I enjoy taking my daydreams and putting them on
On
paper, but
paper.
sometimes I'm not always daydreaming about fantastical things, unfortunately. Sometimes my daydreams are awful because my brain goes on the anxiety train, and it's like, "Hey, what if we went off this bridge right now? Can you
Mhm.
unbuckle your child in time
Right.
before you drown?" Like, and that's awful, but that's what
Yes.
my brain will do, and it'll hyperfixate on that, and I'll spend the next hour of a car ride and not remembering how I got where I'm going. I end up where I'm going, but I spent the entire time problem solving how to get my daughter out of the car seat if we
Right.
go off a bridge.
Right.
So it's just awful.
Oh, I feel you on very deeply on that.
Yeah.
I have had very many of those similar types of intrusive thoughts that they kind of spiral or snowball on each other,
Yeah.
where I can get on a thread and then it's um, the ADHD kicks in and it's every option of everything
Mhm.
that could happen in that
Yes.
scenario. And then my anxiety demands that I follow the worst case scenario path. Right.
Mhm.
So I'm just in that, like, okay, this is the worst thing that could happen in this situation. And this is where I live now.
Yeah, and that's how my brain works very similarly. It's always been, and it does it with everything, even tiny things. It's like, okay, here are the possible branches of things that will
Hmm.
happen. narrow it down to the most likely ones. And it does that for everything from walking to the car. Like my husband, he's like, you cannot do anything. It has to be streamlined. It has to be like the shortest way to this point. There's no backtracking. There's no um, divergent, like going a different path, because it's just how I have to function. And it drives him a little crazy because I'm like, no, it has to be this way.
Right.
That's my brain's narrowed it down that this is the path that will
Right.
work. It's the most likely to succeed. We have to do it.
We have to do it this way.
Yeah.
Do you think that he is neurodivergent as well, or?
He has OCD.
Okay.
It's not like the cleanliness. It's like if I don't line up something like he likes it lined up, he'll come behind me and line it up. My house is very clean because it's not like the obsession of germs type of thing, but he needs
It's
it to be
order.
clean, order, organized. So he has a touch of that, and I think he might have a touch of ADHD too, but I don't know.
Go ahead.
He hasn't been diagnosed either.
No, and that's like I said, I don't.
But he does have the OCD part because he gets it from his mom.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, ADHD runs in families, and autism runs in
it
families.
is. So now that I've noticed in myself, I noticed in my mom. I grew up in a house of projects that were never finished.
Yep.
Like the floor's ripped up, but we haven't put down a new floor. We've got one wall painted, but we haven't painted the rest of the room. We've got a hutch that has paint on one side, but not paint on the other side. And I never realized, I didn't understand that's what she was doing, or that's what was affecting her until now. Now I'm like, Mom, I think
I got it.
Yeah. Like you're the source.
I figured it out.
You start connecting dots when you realize, when you understand, you're just like, okay.
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
Is where all of this comes from.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I did the exact same thing with my family as well, where I can go back now and understand that my mom's desire to redecorate the house.
Yes.
and my mom didn't do just like new fabrics. My mom was like, well, let's move this wall and let's take this wall down and let's put a wall up here. And these were big design choices.
Yes.
Yeah. So now I understand more that need and that drive for like change and all that was, driven by her divergence as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's for me, it was a very reassuring thing to recognize that it wasn't just me and my family, because I have a similar story to yours. I don't think it was maladaptive daydreaming necessarily as much as it was just, I would just immerse myself in books and I would read and I would dissociate and I would be hard to interrupt and would get hyper focused on all that. And now I know that was a maladaptive behavior to the anxiety, because it was the anxiety caused by the ADHD, autism. It's easy just to focus on that story.
Yeah. And I read, when I figured out the maladaptive daydreaming, I read it was like it can be brought on as a coping mechanism for trauma. And I grew up, like, I love both my parents, but when I was growing up, they were both alcoholics and they fought violently until I was probably 10, when my dad, he had a stroke and the doctor was like, you can either quit drinking and smoking or you can die in a few years. And so he quit. But I think I started doing it because they would be fighting and I would be like, I would go into this fantasy world that I created. That was just like how I couldn't escape. I was like 7.
Right.
But,
exactly.
Yeah.
You can't get out of it. Yeah.
And so I connected those dots and I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. But it was also a problem because I did very poorly in anything that wasn't reading or writing related. If it didn't involve a book, I had problems in school. So I'm a similar experiences. I didn't excel in math. I could handle history and some social science, all of those things, because they had I've joked that one of the reasons why I don't test for autism necessarily is because one of my special interests is just people. Mm-hmm.
And some people have said, well, that's just an adaptive behavior when you are autistic and you're trying to understand the environment. But like
Mm-hmm.
having relationships and having connections with people have always been kind of a priority for me. So like a lot of the autism questions are like, you have trouble starting relationships, and it's like, nope, I don't
Yeah.
actually.
Mm-hmm.
I might have trouble maintaining them sometimes because, if people don't understand the way the spicy brains works, and
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
they say object permanence. People will talk about object permanence, but that's not really what it is. Like
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of forget that people exist sometimes, and it's not malicious necessarily. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's and it's my mom and I do it. We're terrible at keeping up with each other because I forget to call
Mm-hmm.
or reach out. Like I love my mother,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
we'll go months without, like, we'll text every now and then, but we haven't called each other, and we
Mm-hmm.
do it to each other. And it's not that I love her any less. It's that day, like, time. I forget how long it's been since we
Right.
talked last,
Yeah.
or I feel bad about it, and I'm bad at keeping up with friendships because I think people expect you to reach out, and I'm not a reach out person.
Mm-hmm.
That's just it's terrible.
It's not terrible. It's probably also part of the adaptive behaviors that you've
Mhm.
developed too, where
Yeah.
it's safer to not put yourself out there sometimes.
Mhm.
And I have found, before I knew that my forgetfulness, that my memory, my bad memory isn't a moral failing.
Mm.
Right? It took
Yeah.
a long time to get to that. My bad memory is not a moral failing
Oh,
space, right? Where
yes.
I have been judged and persecuted and held
Mhm.
responsible sometimes for things that I didn't intend to forget, that I
Mhm.
didn't mean to forget. Like I don't, I just don't have
Yeah.
the memory capacity. My brain doesn't work that way. That's one of the big pieces that's missing. But when you have that, like, forgetfulness, it becomes even harder to like continue to reach out to people, because you're
Mhm.
like, are they mad? Like, and sometimes they are
Yeah.
mad, and sometimes you have like fallen short and they've told a story or created a narrative around you
Mhm.
dropping off the planet that has literally nothing to do with you dropping off the planet,
Mhm.
but they become committed to that. And so
Yes.
then there ends up being like risk and
Yeah.
fear and all kinds of like bad
Mhm.
feelings that get involved in it. So just not reaching out ends up being a little easier.
And then once you've realized you've gone so long, you're like,
Mhm.
I
Right.
don't wanna reach out now because 'cause it's
Right.
been
Because
2
it's
months, and
been
I
so
read your text
long.
message, and I never texted you back.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes I won't even notice or realize, and then I'll have some event that's like, "Oh, I should tell so and so about this." And then I go and look and I'm like, "Oh my god, I haven't responded to this
Exactly,
message for
yeah.
so long. Oh my
Mhm.
goodness. What am I supposed to do with this now?"
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
now I just flat out apologize, and I'm like, "I didn't
Um,
forget to do this because it didn't mean something. Sorry I missed it. I'm sorry I didn't respond, whatever. I just
yeah, I've just basically
say it
been
now."
like, "Hi, I read this, and then I forgot to reply. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I'm
exactly.
replying
Like,
now."
just tell the truth.
Yeah,
Because
just
that
own up
ends up
to it.
being easier.
I know with my husband, because he tells me things like to,
Mhm.
take out the garbage or something, like, something he'll
Right,
t give me a task,
right,
and then I don't do the task because I
right.
forgot the task.
Mhm.
So we're still working we're still working through that one. That, and I have a auditory processing issue, I
Yep,
think, because, if he has to, like, stop anything that I'm doing or the TV or something and talk to me, because I just won't hear him.
right.
And
Mhm.
and I think it frustrates him a little bit. He'll be like, I told you this," or like, I was talking to you. I was just talking to you. Like, you were looking at me and my mouth was moving and we were having a conversation, and I was like, I didn't hear you because there's a beep over there.
Right, yeah, yeah. I have always before I knew that it was the ADHD, I described it as I am incapable of having two verbal pathways
Mhm.
enter my brain at the same time.
Yes.
If
Mhm.
if I cannot, like, I knew for years that I couldn't write and listen to music because
Mm-hmm.
I would automatically transcribe the words. And
Yeah, I can't do anything with vocals. I can do
yes,
instrumental music fine. No,
exactly. Yeah.
no
Somebody told me,
lyrics.
somebody gave me this. They said the Bridgerton soundtrack is really fun for writing. Since you
Hmm.
write romance, it might be fun to listen to because it's all like pop
Yeah.
songs with
That's what I think. I
orchestral.
was the only high schooler whose favorite band was like Hans Zimmer.
Yeah.
It was just like
That's
I was the
awesome.
kid who collected soundtrack CDs
Soundtracks.
instead
Yeah.
of rock CDs. Because I'm like,
I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense.
mm-hmm,
But yeah, the auditory processing can be particularly frustrating. In a recent episode, I was talking about how I will not realize that I've heard something and somebody will be
mm-hmm,
speaking to me and I'll say, huh? And they'll start to repeat it and then my brain will click in and hear the
yeah,
first time,
mm-hmm.
even
I
though
do
they're in the
that
middle
all
of
the
repeating
time.
it. And then
I
I
do that all the
answer
time.
as they're repeating themselves and people get
Mm-hmm.
mad. And it's like, I'm not doing it on purpose. Like
Yeah.
it takes my brain sometimes a second to catch up. So some
Mm-hmm.
of my
It's
closer
like gotta
friends,
parse the information and then
yes. Well,
it's
and because you're not just taking in the words, right? Like
yeah.
I'm never just taking in one thing. It's the beep, it's the car, it's the alarm that went
Mhm,
off down the street, it's oh my God, there's a fan on, it's
mhm.
whatever else, the light changed. It could be anything. I'm taking
Yeah.
in so much information that the stream of words is one piece of
Mhm.
all of this, and my brain
Yeah.
doesn't have the capacity to pick out what's important.
Mhm. No, I tried, explaining it to him once and to my husband, and, the best thing for it was we happened to be on a trip to London, and we went to the Tate Modern Museum,
Hmm.
and they had an exhibit where it was a room with just a tower of TVs and radios,
Uh-huh.
and it was, like, 20 feet high and 6 feet wide, and they were all on the radio and the TV. Every single one of them were on and playing at the same time.
Oh God.
And I was like, this is what the world sounds like to
Right.
me. I was like, did you hear this right now? Can you understand what any of these things are saying at a given time? No, that's what the world sounds like to
Yes.
me.
Yes.
It
This is
sounds so
every moment.
loud and everyone's
Yeah.
talking at the same time.
Yes, exactly. Every moment of every
Mhm.
day has all of this noise.
Yes.
I can tell you that the ADHD medication does help with that.
Yeah.
It does make things a little bit
Yeah.
less
I'm
loud.
definitely going to reach out to my doctor and just I was afraid of feeling like a hypochondriac because like I've got celiac disease and they think
Mhm.
I have lupus and I've got all of these other like
Mhm.
autoimmune possibilities because like I did the test and when you have one autoimmune you have probably
Markers
more than
for
one
several
because
others, yeah.
yeah your
Mhm.
immune system just like a switch flips and it's like hi
Hi.
we hate your entire environment. You're no longer allowed to eat bread.
Right. I'm sorry, that's hard.
Yeah, it's so sad. I
Yeah.
miss bread. So for like the last few years, I've been like have to go to the dermatologist every 3 months. I was going to a rheumatologist every 3 months,
Mhm.
and I'm getting blood drawn, and I was just like, I know this is an issue that I am not or something that I should discuss with her
Mhm.
and get formal diagnosis because I think I would function better if I had help.
Right.
But I don't wanna add another thing to the
Piece
list of
on top of it.
problems that I already
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. I did something similar. I was going through premenopause and I had to deal with my hormones before I dealt with
Mhm.
ADHD. Like,
Yeah.
you have to have priorities sometimes. And,
Mhm.
there are certain things that need to take precedence. So,
Yeah.
all that
But
makes sense.
I'm gonna put my big girl pants on and get it done very soon though,
Cool.
because I can see how it's helped. The guy that I'm friends with through my husband who was like, "Oh, yeah, you
Hmm.
totally have it." Like, you you need to go speak to someone, and then my best friend recently got diagnosed, and I'm like, "Okay, I need to stop being afraid of this
Right.
and
Right.
just
Yeah.
go get it done."
Yeah. I think it would be valuable
Mhm.
for you. So what has like the response been? Like how does have you talked to your mom about this, and have you like shared your diagnosis, and
So
how
I've
does she
talked to
respond?
her about it, but she's very old school Southern lady,
Yeah,
and just like, yeah, that's how I function. Like that makes sense, and but she's not into like going and getting a diagnosis,
sure.
and she's like, I'm 64 years old, so this is who I am.
Right? This
I'm
is
gonna
just
live in this house with everything half painted. But
this is just my reality. Sorry.
yeah, this is
Yeah,
just my
yeah,
reality.
yeah. Well, and and I can respect that too. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Have you had a
And
conversation like with your sister or?
no, my sister is very like she I think made it out of like her brain seems to function I think like on a neurotypical level,
Okay.
and but we've never discussed our ailments, or not ailments, but we've never discussed things that are wrong with us. We're just not the so we have a very interesting relationship. We weren't really close until I moved out
Ah,
of my house, and now we're close. Like we have daughters that are 2 years apart, but we're still like on that not close enough to talk about health
right.
unless it's like,
Yeah.
"Hi, I'm critically ill," type
Right.
of thing. But
I
it's just
lost
not
a
on a
finger and
comfort
yeah.
level. We've never been very comfortable talking to each other about the things that are wrong with us, and I
Sure.
think that has a lot to do with the fact, we were the adults growing up in
Yes.
our
Yeah,
family.
parentified. Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that's a lot to unpack there.
There is a lot to unpack there. I have a fair amount of that in my history as well, so I
Yeah.
understand,
Yeah.
especially for daughters, I think the
Mhm.
responsibilities that end up when you're in a not functioning household.
Mhm.
I don't wanna
Yeah.
say dysfunctional because it's that word's kind of loaded with a bunch of other things, but when you're in a household that's being impacted by any kind of addiction, that
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
kids end up being the ones taking care of things. I
Yeah.
definitely had a fair amount
Yeah.
of that happening, so,
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah, it can make it complicated.
Yeah, so we kinda grew up as, like, roommates, or not even roommates, kind of like, coworkers. We
Right.
were like, because we were like, "We're here together to work on this problem with
Mhm.
together," and
Yeah.
it
Kind of
didn't
like
leave
a
a lot
formal
of time for
separation that way.
bonding.
Mhm.
Yeah, there wasn't, like, a lot of sisterly bonding that we got to do
Yeah. I mean,
because we
that's
worked on like, if we weren't at school, we were working on a farm,
right.
and or we
Yeah.
were dealing with the issues within our family.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
That takes a lot of strength. You and your sister are both very strong to have come out of that and flourished
Mhm.
because it's not easy.
It isn't, no.
No. Especially if you are fighting against an invisible disability that
Mhm.
nobody knows that you have.
Yeah, like, I didn't in high school, I just remember my parents, they were so confused about what was going on with me because I was living, like I said, living in my head, and I would pretend to sleep so I could live in my head. And they were like, "Are you on drugs? Like, you're tired all the time?" I'm like, "No, I'm just wanna stay in the daydream because that's where I'm happier."
Right. Yeah, this
And
reality that I have made up for myself is so much
yeah.
happier than where I'm actually living. I would rather be
Yeah.
there. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's I mean, that's fair, and that is a survival, mechanism,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
that makes sense. If you had a chance to go back and sort of talk to yourself when you were that age and when you were living through some of that, now that you know your diagnosis, what do you think you'd say other than saying, "Hey, you have ADHD?" Like other than
Mhm.
that or saying, "Hey, you're neurodivergent." What do you think you would say to yourself?
Oh, you are not as weird as the other kids make you feel.
Yes.
That, you there are people out there, people, you will find your people one day, and you will flourish and come out of your shell, and you're not alone. Because I literally grew up going, this is not where I'm supposed to be. I am not supposed to be here. I belong somewhere else because I felt so, so out of place.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's a lovely thought and a lovely sentiment for your younger self. And
Yeah.
I got a little bit of chills for that one, so thanks.
And I'm like, not gonna cry.
That's okay. I asked that on the panel a couple weeks ago at Rose City Comic Con, and somebody burst into tears. So that I asked the question too. So you're not alone. It's intended to be that kind of dig in kind of question. So thank you for being vulnerable with us and sharing like that.
Yeah, thank you. My birthday was recently, and I was like, man, if I could go back and talk to 16-year-old me and just tell her what she's doing right now, she would not believe it at all.
See, and that's gorgeous. That's a beautiful thing, because you took what might have been a really detrimental thing for your life, and you turned it into something absolutely outstandingly beautiful. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So let our listeners know where they can find your books and all the other things to know about you.
So I primarily write fantasy, and I guess it's romantasy now. I have books, they're available on Amazon and basically wherever books are sold if you request them. On my website, KaytalinPlatt.com. I have a book series about a time mage trapped in a recurring war with a creature bent on destroying the universe, and he just happened to take the man that she loves as his host. So he's walking around in that guy's body, and she is trying to get him back. And the first book's called The Living God, and it's on everywhere. Amazon.
Yes. All right, and I will have links in the show notes for everybody to find you and to find your books.
Awesome.
And thank you so much for coming and talking with us.
Thank you for having me. This is a really interesting conversation to have.
Thank you so much for listening. Check out Kaytalin's novels on Amazon or go to your local bookstore and request a copy. Follow her on TikTok and Instagram to see some of the amazing character art she's made for her series. While you're there, follow this podcast at Divergent Paths Consulting, no spaces, and subscribe on whatever podcast player you use so you never miss an episode. Share with your spicy brain friends and anyone who might love someone with a spicy brain. And until next time, stay spicy.